that I have on the schedule. So for everyone, I emailed you the schedule. So if you're not sure, you can check your email from this morning and find the documents. So we're going to begin with Molly Ott and Shelby Mcauliffe. And by the way, if I mispronounce any of your names, deep apologies, feel free to correct me. Molly and Shelby created 3 videos to really capture the sense of what we were living with during the pandemic. And I just thought maybe they could start with talking about what inspired you. And apologies, because we were on tight time and there's so many people, unfortunately, we're gonna have to really limit answers to 2 or 3 minutes at most. So, but Molly and Shelby, start us off.
Oh no, Molly froze. Hi, Shelby, and this is really unfortunate because Molly was going to answer all of the questions.
Well, if you want, we can actually pause. And Danny, do you want to jump to Bertha and Mario, I believe?
That would be great.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah, if you haven't had a chance to look at their project, they made a video and a visual art project about the 2 cities of, I believe it was Brownsville and
Matamoros.
Okay, and the current situation with their border and how COVID has affected that. So do you guys just kind of want to walk us through your visual art project, why you chose the mediums you did, and kind of what each part of it means to you?
Yeah, absolutely. So first, what inspired us, it was very personal in terms of both Mario and I were separated from our families because of the border closure. Mario's daughter lives in Brownsville and Mario lives in Matamoros, and I live in Brownsville, and my mom and the rest of my family lives in Matamoros. So today, the border is still partially closed, and Mario, who's here with us, hasn't seen his daughter since March. So yeah, this is a very personal project, and we are really grateful that you help us to put this together. What we especially were trying to address here was to portray the situation and how we understand that most families are separated because of COVID, but it's way harder when you cannot even see your family and that you know that it's kind of beyond 6 feet apart. Like it's just, your family is just there and there's no way you can reach it. Something that we did to put this together was, first, I asked a lot of people from Brownsville in Matamoros if they agreed to have this videotape interviews. They say yes, and after I did approximately 20 interviews with these people, I put together all that information, and Mario and I discussed all this, and is when he came up with all the images that you see that he paint into this painting. That it's actually Mario kept repeating that to me, like, how many? 14 portraits instead of not only one?
Yes, it was about 18.
18.
Around 18.
Yeah.
18 images
And,
instead of just one.
And when we end up completing the project on time, we now have a new version of it, because when the time to submitting the project happened, we were still waiting for the copyright permissions for the music we originally wanted to use. And now we have all the permissions, so we put together like a new version with all the songs that we wanted to use. And well, that's kind of the summary of what we did. I don't know, Mario, if you want to talk a little bit on the materials that you use and why you decide to put the red.
Yes, well, basically the painting, the background of the painting, it has to do with a map of both cities, Matamoros and Brownsville. And I use this background in order to put the images of families torn apart, as Berta was talking about for this situation, because of this situation. And I decided to first I painted the families, and then I cut them in half, and I sewed them with the red thread. Excuse my English. And in order to kind of like representate the bond, the blood bond between the families, and the whole thing with the separation of the families. Berta was talking earlier. This is a very personal subject because of our family situation. And basically, I decided to do the painting because I work on paintings as a professional. That's my language in a professional way. So that's why we decided to go on with painting instead of photography or just the interviews.
Great, thank you so much. And truly, I hope everyone gets a chance to see Mario and Bertha's video. It's very, very moving. And I put something in the chat. So, please feel free, because again, I know we're kind of short on time, but if you have other questions or comments, feel free to have a kind of conversation going on through the chat as we continue. So I think Molly's back on. So Molly and Shelby, if you could just talk about the inspiration for your video pieces, that would be great.
Hi, well, I'm Molly Ott. I'm hoping to get my MFA in sculpture. This is my second year at CU Boulder, and I made this video in collaboration with Shelby Mcauliffe.
Mcauliffe, and I'm a third-year grad student and a master's in fine art for photography. So we created 3 videos. Molly.
Yeah, so we were really interested in the rituals that were emerging out of quarantine through friendships and also through communication, and how these rituals were appearing through Zoom and FaceTime and even like social distance just situations. And so we decided to use those platforms in a 3-part video to see what would happen. And so, yeah, we relied a lot on just how we felt as we were contending with these new emotions and new ways of seeing things. And so there is a lot of humor and intuition and happenstance. So yeah, it was fascinating to explore our relationship together through quarantine.
Great. Shelby, did you want to add anything or?
No, I think just as far as like breaking down the 3 videos, if you go on the website and see them, they kind of progress through maybe the different kind of absurdities of social norms and relating. So the first video is social distancing and what that meant for relationships. And so we built sculptures out of found objects and cleaned them. And then the second is we're actually recording 2 separate videos of different routines of cleaning ourselves and washing our hands separately. And then we did a third one where it was like a kind of like a respondents. We were on Zoom together while we were washing our hands and cleaning, doing our disinfecting routine upon ourselves. So just a little explanation of what each 3 videos are and how they explore the kind of different public versus private and those kind of relationships between the 2.
Great, thank you. Turning now, I've actually bundled 2 of the projects, and I think that there are actually 4 people who are here to respond. So there's Melody Roshman, who has this really lovely blog, I want to say, and so fascinating. And it actually gave me some ideas about teaching things that I could be doing. So thank you for that, Melody. About going through all of Shakespeare's plays and kind of thinking about, this, 10, okay. But the ambition, I think, was maybe to read all of the plays. And then because everyone kept saying, especially in the early days of the pandemic, like, remember, Shakespeare wrote King Lear during the plague, right? As if all of us were going to come out and produce King Lear. And then, so Melody's blog and kind of talking about Shakespeare, as well as, the use of the blog itself as a 21st century or late 20th century technology made me think about older forms of technology. And that brings me to Gregory and Susan and Julia, your video on P and Qs, minding your P and Qs, and the kind of blending. Oh, and I think, sorry, is Gregory also here? Or Daniel Long, sorry, I think there were 4 of you, right, sorry, Daniel. And so using the kind of modern contemporary video form to record an older form of art print. And again, kind of thinking about the way that the plague works, kind of works as a theme throughout both of your projects, while also incorporating older forms of art partnered or juxtaposed with newer forms of technology. So I'm not sure who wants to start, but maybe we'll start with Melody and then go on to the printing press.
Hi, yeah. Like she said, I am a 4th-year PhD candidate in the English department, and my post was eventually done as kind of an interactive blog, which is interesting because for most of the project, it was this very kind of analog thing. It was just me with my giant volume of Shakespeare from undergrad and sitting on the floor eating Sour Patch Kids and just like powering through plays. I read 10 of them. I really enjoyed looking at your folks' project and revisiting it yesterday. And I think that the question of archives is definitely the question that I came to again and again in my project. I started with this idea of Shakespeare as this kind of elevated archive of art and the plague. And what my project ended up being about was more of the missing archives, the archives we don't have, absence, whether that is just kind of ordinary people who died, whose lives are forgotten, and in COVID today, like which deaths you remember, who gets a New York Times obituary. I ended up starting the project on the exact same day that the Times published their 1,000 miniature obituaries on the front cover. And I say in the project that the one obituary that has constantly stayed with me is from Fred Walter Gray, 75 Benton County, Washington, liked his bacon and hash browns crispy. And just this like tiny human detail I think about like every day when I'm making breakfast. And I think if there's one thing I return to in the project a lot, is this idea of who gets to create art and who gets to be remembered as having created art and as having had meaningful suffering, meaningful deaths, and how that contrasts to just like ordinary people, especially in the terms of the fact that we think about Shakespeare as being this, not for an age, but for all time. What kind of transcendent insight can Shakespeare offer us? And what I found when reading Shakespeare, rereading it, was that I was so angry through all of it at the way women were treated and poor people and like queer figures and so forth. And I ended up doing all of this reading about like inequality during the plague, and that of course the plague affected people differently based on class and race and ethnicity and so forth. Of course refugees were the ones dying. Of course poor women were the ones having to do care work and getting sick and all of these things. And looking at how like, yeah, the plague was for an age, was not for an age, but for all time. And that like, we still see these inequalities today. We still see suffering the same way. We still see these ways that we like remember certain people as having meaningful deaths and having meaningful lives, and how that kind of is tied to like baking and sewing and cooking and taking care of children, and this like work that is not acknowledged as great artistic work, but that has become so much of our daily lives during this pandemic. I don't know if that made any sense.
No, it did. Thank you. Yeah. Minding your P's and Q's.
Yeah. I'm Greg. I'm in Norland today working in special collections, so that's why I have my mask on. I wanted to take it off while I answer and visit with you all so that I don't sound like the adults in a Charlie Brown cartoon. My collaborators, Susan, Julia, and Danny are here too. And we had a great time with this project. And so I have we prepared a little bit here that I'll try to get through in just a couple minutes. So our idea came from the bills and the tables of mortality from historical plagues and pandemics, and the broadsides that were printed and posted for the public's knowledge. So what we wanted to do was connect our current pandemic to the plagues in history through the broadside format, and then through the thoughts written by those people that we quote in the broadside. Can I share my screen? Is that possible? Because I have
think so, yeah.
Posters up here. Okay, so then you can kind of follow along with what I'm talking about here. So the other goal that we had, or the hope that we had, is for our readers to consider how the mortality statistics from our present plague and pandemic will be stored for people in the future to study. So, perhaps instead of a printed bill of mortality or publication in the weekly newspaper or something like that, be in an internet archive of some sort like Melody mentioned. And then the other question is, what will people in our time write about this pandemic? And will the particulars of the situations then now parallel each other enough that we understand existentially and not just academically the effects of the plague? And so a perfect example is Melody's blog, which we just saw. So yeah, I really enjoyed reading that, Melody. I just got captivated and just read through the whole thing in one fell swoop. So, okay, so the title of our broadside, Minding Your P's and Q's, is a play off of that very expression. And one theory for the origin of this expression is that it came from the print shops where lowercase p's, q's, b's, and d's look confusingly alike when they're upside down and in reverse, which is how you set and sort type when you're printing something. The exhortation in the title is for the reader to place our current pandemic in a historical context in that continuum. And then finally, the mail art aspect of it. So the project lent itself really well to be created in steps that could be done by each of us without needing to work physically in the same space. So the approach was influenced by mail art, which is often created in a serial fashion. That is, one person sends artwork to another and they add something to it and then sends it on and so on and so on. And in that way, quote, mail art travels from one person to another like a benign virus, unquote. So Susan printed the background images of the mortality tables, and we had those made into polymer plates that were large enough. I forget the exact dimensions, but the sheets themselves are, I think, 15 by 18 or 17 or something like that. Okay, and then the prints were transferred to me, and I printed the title and the acrostic, and then we transferred them over to Julia, and she has a press in her shop, and she printed the spine titles of the books, which are the quotes that you see printed vertically there. And then those were transferred back to me, and I went back to our print shop at the Book Arts League and printed Mcauliffe on. And then all three of us made video clips of our process of doing this, and then Danny created his really great video, I think, included some of those clips. So,
Fantastic.
Thank you.
One last quick question. Where does it live, the physical print or prints?
Yep. Well, each of us kept a copy. We have one copy here in Special Collections. We have another copy at the Book Arts League. Let's see. Susan, Julia, Danny, am I missing one anywhere? So, nope. Okay.
No, I think that covers it. Yeah.
Okay. And we do have extra printed copy in case the Center for Humanities and Arts would like.
Oh yes, that's actually a little bit what I was hinting at. So I can talk to you offline. Thank you.
Great, yeah.
I'll turn it over to Danny now.
So next we have Mariana, who created, and her project Touching, which is a series of Lumenprint art made out of wildlife that she found in her backyard. Mariana, do you just kind of want to walk us through what inspired you and what you were trying to portray with this, with your prints?
Yeah. Hi, everyone. So I'll start by describing what a Lumenprint is. A Lumenprint is a piece of darkroom paper that if you ever worked in a traditional photo darkroom, you would take that piece of paper and expose it to light, process it in traditional darkroom chemistry. That is what you use for making a Lumenprint. The difference is that you don't put it in the developer where it turns black. Instead, you just fix it so that it stays. And in particular, it works really well with really expired old photographic paper. So if any of you have old boxes of darkroom paper laying around, don't throw it out. I'll take all of your garbage, can still be used. But it produces some pretty interesting colors that are completely unpredictable. You expose it to sunlight, so you can sit out in sunlight for, a few minutes, but you get the better results the longer it sits. And so you just fix it, and then it just turns into whatever colors the particular paper and the particular intensity of the sunlight will do. So it's a process where you don't have a lot of control. And so it was kind of fitting for the current situation. One of the first things that I started to miss when we first started the shelter in place was touching. All of a sudden, touching became kind of like a violent act, right? Like you didn't know what you could touch safely, nothing. You couldn't touch your friends, you couldn't hug your friends, you couldn't hug your family members. And that to me represented a really big loss. And at the same time, it was March, April in Colorado, where all of us who have lived here for a while know that you come off of a winter of browns into starting to see those greens. It's such a hopeful time. It's such a time of growth. And so I kind of wanted to do something that related these two opposite emotions of, one, you have like the anxiety and the fear caused by the new circumstances we were living in, to kind of this time of like hope and regrowth. And so the Lumenprints that I made combined my physical touch with anything that was coming up in my yard. I was looking for weeds, and I was starting some seeds. And I have a little print here. These are really small because it literally captures, so this is like, you can see here, like it's my fingers. And these are some chives that started coming up in my garden. And so it the paper physically records the touch, and it physically records the objects that I was laying there, which were all things that were coming up just in my immediate garden. And so, yeah, these are really small and intimate, which I really like because, again, proximity to objects is something that we're still, that we kind of had to have a shift in. Being close to something all of a sudden is like, oh. And so the prints kind of celebrate that and kind of memorialize the physical things, the intimate things that are lost to us during a time of social distancing.
Great, thank you. I've bundled a second pairing, which is, I think you go by Matt Smiley and Michael Thornton. And so both of you have compositions where you have various performers. I think, Matt, in your case, they seem to be solo, although there is a kind of collaboration in one of yours. And then Michael, with yours, they're all collaborations, but they're all in their own space. And so I was just sort of curious about like the choice of music that you decided to pick, like in your case, Michael, Matt, like what the challenges were. I mean, writing 44 separate compositions individually seems like a Herculean task. And so I was really interested in the contrast, especially between your two projects, because, in some ways they're very similar in, being kind of recorded musical performances. And in some ways they really contrast with the different approach that you each took.
Great. Yeah. Do you want to go first, Michael?
Sure. What I'm happy to do to start is clarify the distinction between what we've done, because they're really quite different. And I do want to applaud Matt because he actually created 44 compositions and then found performers to align those compositions with. Actually, I think they may have had a dictation element. I'll let him speak more to that. But he found, as a composer in the 21st century, you also have to be an incredible promoter of your work. And so to create that quantity of output and find performers that were willing to share it in a virtual space is a very unique thing, and is probably far more on the higher end of the spectrum than what I was aiming to achieve. And to be frank about it, what I was looking to do when we began quarantine, I was actually on sabbatical at the time and was rudely pulled back into my horn studio because all of a sudden it was like, well, there are no performances, there are no job opportunities, there's nothing going on. What are we supposed to be doing? And so we actually had a class where we talked about art and how it prevails through any type of circumstance, which has already been alluded to with Shakespeare and different things that we've talked about today. And so whether it's people drawing on caves, or whether it's something as powerful as Viktor Frankl writing in a concentration camp, we find ways to make art that is meaningful and to share it in the available platforms. So what we strove to do in ours was to kind of take different groupings of people, including current students at CU and professionals in the Colorado Symphony and some others, and we tried to make use of available platforms like TikTok, which that video may be missing from my portfolio. I'll make sure I get it to you guys. But we have a TikTok video. We have a couple that are based on 80s rock anthems. We have one that's based on the music of Star Wars that was released on May the 4th, and we had a Star Spangled Banner that was released on the 4th of July. And through these projects, we worked in various different platforms like Acapella, the TikTok app, the different things that we tried to figure out how we could almost make social commentary through our art, and how we could connect in a more universal way than classical music often does. So I'm done talking now, but I also want to say how much I really appreciate the CHA celebrating this period of time, and what the importance of art during this period of time, because it can be a lonely time for those of us that are in humanities. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you. I've really enjoyed, I mean, it's helped sustain me to be able to look at all of your projects. And then it was such a pleasure to reacquaint myself ahead of today. Matt.
Yeah, and I completely agree with what Michael was saying. You know, a lot of performers and musicians had all these, performances, teaching engagements, festivals, all that on the books that all got canceled. 6-8 months worth of work just canceled in a few days. And so kind of left with that problem of how do you continue to be creative, to force yourself to kind of continue to keep going on. So with my project, I ended up basically putting a call out for performers just on social media. And I just basically told them, anyone who requests a piece or some kind of variation on a composition, I will write them a piece of music. And so I ended up getting about 75 requests from various friends. And so it's still an ongoing process because I haven't finished all my requests. But at my last count, I had about over 50 compositions, and maybe about a third of them have been recorded at this point. I left it up to the performer, mostly just wanting audio recordings, but then I really lucked out with several of my friends who ended up making high quality video recordings. And so my favorite one is one of my friends who's a young parent who's stuck at home during quarantine watching his kids. And so I wrote a drum set piece, which then he ended up manipulating with video editing. So it became a piece for drum set and 2 small children. And he worked all the rhythmic hits and everything together with basically his day-to-day playing along with his kids. So kind of for me, what I really was trying to do was for each performer, try to write something that was appropriate to the kind of musician they were. So I wrote pieces for jazz musicians, for rock musicians, I still have to write a hip hop beat for a rapper. That's still on the agenda. And I tried to, if possible, to leave certain elements open for improvisation or for the performer to be able to interpret things themselves. So some of them have just like some lines of text for them to do whatever they want with. So mine is continuing to be growing. And I actually went into the studio about a month ago with a jazz quintet and recorded about 4 of these pieces with a quintet, which will be a professional album release, hopefully in early 2021. So it's been a very fun kind of open-ended project for me.
And Matt, are you a graduate student?
I'm a second-year DMA in the Jazz Studies department.
Yeah, I feel like you should get course credit for all of the work you've done.
Oh, for me, this is fun. It's my version of watching TV or video games. It's just getting creative work out there.
I really do recommend everyone to see the second video with, I think it's Ed, I'm not sure how to pronounce his last name, but Ed Brazil, maybe? Because it really seemed like he showed you those videos and you composed based on those videos. So it's really, I'm glad to get the backstory that he actually created this music video essentially out of content that his children had. I mean, it's such an incredible collaboration. Okay, so I'm gonna turn it back to Danny now.
Yeah, next we have Julia, who created a interactive website relating to Emily Dickinson and her work. Julia, do you kind of just want to walk us through the process for your project, kind of just from idea to final product? It looks like a lot went into it.
Yeah, so this is a virtual reality experience based on Emily Dickinson and her poetry and her house. The overall idea was to make an escape room game where rather than escaping out of different rooms, you're escaping further inside the house as kind of a metaphor for escaping inside your own imagination and your own inner life, which I think matches nicely with Emily Dickinson. So this is made with Unreal Engine. I'm not sure how much you want me to go into the process of actually making this thing. It's a little hard to describe. I have a video, so I'll post a link to that in case you want to watch it later. But basically the part I got done of this is the final scene in the game, which is Emily Dickinson's bedroom, where she did most of her poetry writing. It's got a fireplace and the desk she wrote at. It's got a bunch of her poems in there. And I got those from the Emily Dickinson archive, which is a great resource for both images of the original manuscripts and the text nicely typed out because her handwriting was very bad. So in the VR room, you can see the text transposed on top of the original handwriting. So it's an environment where you can go in there, read poetry, reflect on life and the possible advantages, I think, of being alone and stuck with yourself for a while. And it's got a virtual pen and paper, so you can write your own poetry in there or take notes and do research, kind of whatever you want.
Thank you, that's awesome. And then next, I'm so sorry if I mispronounce your name. I believe is it Mariha? And her project on vivid dreaming. She created a series of poems and photographs related to vivid dreaming and COVID. Do you just kind of want to walk us through your inspiration for that and just kind of your process going through that?
I don't know if they're here. I'm not seeing the name on any as I'm doing a quick scan.
Yeah, I was also looking.
Okay, so we can always go back to her. Sally, I think you are here. Am I seeing? Yes, there you are. So Sally, I was wondering if you could talk about what you were trying to address in your particular piece. And I'm sorry that Min Young's not here because I feel like your two pieces really speak to each other in terms of kind of the experience of being an instructor in a classroom with students and especially with international students and the kind of anti-Asian violence that's going on that is the consequence of COVID-19. Oh, I think you're muted, Sally.
I muted myself. Okay. I teach a lot of different classes in the program for writing and rhetoric, but particularly I teach classes for international students. And for the last few semesters, they have become increasingly Chinese. I had one other Asian student from Thailand last semester, and otherwise everybody was Chinese. So it was really interesting because they had much greater awareness of what was going on with Corona. I had a student from Wuhan that the other students would like jokingly scoot their chairs away from in January. And so it raised my consciousness quite a bit. And I gave them the option of creating anything artistic for extra credit when we went to online learning. to express how they were dealing with Corona. And they submitted some really beautiful things. There's music, there's artwork. It's my essay is illustrated. If you'd like to take a look at it, you can see their work. And so I continued to correspond with a lot of these students over the summer. I was concerned about them. Some of them went home, some of them stayed in Boulder. It was really frightening for them. Some really awful things happened to them. And there were also really interesting cultural and political disconnects between what they saw happening in the United States and what they thought was the right course of action. And so with several of them, I maintained a correspondence over the summer, asking them questions, getting answers, them asking me questions. So a lot of my essay is quotes from my students, and then it is illustrated particularly by, I think, quite a wonderful black and white photographic essay of one of my students, Jiang, and other works that they produced. I also reflect on my own experience. I'm in a bicultural marriage and have spent a lot of time in Turkey and happened to be there during the coup attempt in 2016. I was in Istanbul. And so I was considering my experience of some fear there. Although I was very safe at home with my extended family, and imagining what it was like for my students to be somewhere when not only is there a pandemic, but it's being blamed on them. And there's a big crisis in the country and they are associated with it and targeted. And so I did have a strong empathetic response to them as someone who lives a pretty international life. That I refer to, but really the focus is on my quite amazing students and their art and their political and cultural discussion that I just really wanted to celebrate. They did all kinds of amazing things. They cooked, they embroidered, they painted, they made music. And so the essay is a combination of their political and cultural commentary and their art.
Thank you. I mean, I think it's really telling that when we are under stress, right, when we are in lockdown, in these kind of quarantine circumstances, that so many of us are turning to art as a way, either of consuming art or producing art, as a way to really kind of survive what we're going through. Yeah. Okay, turning now back to Danny.
Yeah, well, turn it over to Bentley. He created a video about the spread of disease in America and Chad. Bentley, do you just kind of want to describe what the content of your video and what you were trying to portray there and the points you were trying to make?
Sure, yeah. So I actually had an earlier rough draft of this short film that I submitted and got some really useful feedback from Jennifer and others. Have been workshopping the film too. It's an exploration of this feeling that I've had since the beginning of the lockdown, where there are striking similarities to what it feels like to be under lockdown and many things I felt as a teenager, like growing up in Chad. One of them is you just feel like your life is going nowhere and there's nothing really to live for and to work for. And then others are more disease specific, especially the immediacy of potential infection. The idea of, as you can see in this scene here, this is actually the first movie I ever shot when I was 17, about conspiracy theories regarding AIDS. And there's overlap with other epidemics that have happened in Chad as well, to where disease is very immediate. I mentioned in the film that there's a famous market in the capital city in N'Djamena called Souk Cholera, like the cholera market. And so you can guess where that name came from. And my dad is an infectious disease doctor. In fact, part of the thing I explore in this film is these memories of accompanying my dad on polio vaccination clinics when I was a kid and bored and have nothing to do and no imagination of where my life is going. I would go on these UNICEF polio vaccination campaigns. So just reflecting on all these things, especially the emotional impact of the lockdown, having a fear from my friends in Chad that the country may not be equipped to handle the COVID epidemic, and the opposite has happened. That the U.S. has actually been hit and mishandled far, far worse than Chad. I get WhatsApp messages from friends every day with sort of daily reports, and it's like 2 cases here, 3 cases there. So it's been really interesting to reflect on the complications of this. And one last thing is that as a kid with nothing to do, nothing to hope for, we created activities for ourselves. So in the re-edit of this, which I'm actually presenting in a class with Pooja Rangan, is a writer on the writer of the book Immediations, sort of on the ethics of documentary filmmaking. I'm looking at how we use basketball as a space to kill our free time, and then here CU took down all the basketball goals outside during the lockdown as part of its efforts to shame students and whatnot. So I was wondering why that basketball rim's being removed affected me so much, and it's unleashed some childhood trauma. So there you go.
Wow, I had no idea that CU was going so far as to take down equipment to prevent people from gathering. Yeah, that's deep. Okay, Yumi Roth is not here. She's chairing art and art history, so I think we're going to forgive her for her. She said she wasn't sure if she'd be able to make it. And then we have Evan Granger. And Evan, I was hoping, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, but I was hoping you could actually talk about kind of like what happened in terms of your initial proposal, and then what you turned into us, which is beautiful. I love your video, but I know that from conception to final product, you had to really kind of adjust to the challenges of things changing.
Certainly, yeah. Thematically, I think the video stayed in the same lane that I initially approached you all about, but just as far as scheduling went, it's a tough industry, the restaurant industry right now. And it's a small group of people tasked with a lot with very little guidance from the government at the moment. And quite frankly, they're just running from small fire to small fire. And so somebody wanting to come film them is not high on their agenda. So the project originally, I had interest in approaching other restaurant groups and getting a larger take on this whole experience with COVID. But thankfully, I was able to fall back to my comfort spot, which is a restaurant that I've worked out all through college, Arcana Restaurant. They're on 9th and Walnut. And they're a wonderful group of people. They've been doing a bunch of work for the community throughout COVID, from like food share and working with our food banks to feed frontline workers and people struggling with homelessness or anything related to COVID. But yeah, I'm happy with what I ended up being able to make for them because it's really useful. It's telling their story. So yeah, I hope that answers your question there.
It does. Thank you. And we have 15 minutes of open time. So I'm not sure if people had questions for one another, or if maybe kind of a general question for everyone is, what it's been like sharing your work. I know, Bentley, you've been sharing your film on various circuits. I'm wondering about Greg and Julia and Daniel and Susan, whether, what the reaction has been to the broadsides and the video. And, just I'd love to hear what kind of feedback you've been getting in sharing your work.
I can go first. I presented my project over the summer at the Emily Dickinson International Society's annual meeting, which was very fun all over Zoom. They had a lot of really good feedback for me. They liked it a lot. They had a lot of opinions about what specific poems I needed to include in there. So I think I need to add a bunch. And what was the woman representing the Emily Dickinson archive had some really good suggestions about other books and materials I could add, which Emily Dickinson didn't write, but were part of her personal library. So then you can see the things that she wrote in the context of the things she was reading at the time. And I thought that was a really great idea that I should definitely add in the near future.
Great, thank you. Anyone else want to share?
I think for us, something good that happened is that people that watch it start like sharing it to other circles that work with migration and borders, etc. And a journal reached out to us and asked us if we agreed to for them to publish the video as part of their journal. And that was super, I don't know, we are very excited about that. And it's going to be part of their next issues. Yeah, that was great.
Excellent. That's fantastic.
Well, I can say we were very flattered and honored to have the scans of the broadsides accepted in another exhibit this year. And my collaborator, Julia, can remember exactly the name of the exhibit. I'm not very good with those details, but
I think it's Onwards.
Onwards, thank you, yes.
I think curated by Jennifer Heath.
Great, that's great, thank you.
Oh, thanks.
Melody, yeah.
I actually have a question, if that's okay. I was so fascinated. I love watching any and all videos of like physical production and printing and so forth. Obviously, a lot of us in our various forms of art and research and such have found that there's limited access to whether that's the library or to labs and maker spaces and all of these different things. And I noticed in your thank yous, you thanked a bunch of different places. I'm assuming, though maybe I'm wrong, that you don't all have like large printing presses in your homes. But I was just wondering whether you experienced any change in your access to, and this could be a kind of question for everyone, I guess. I mean, mine was easy. I went to my bookshelf and got a book out and read it. But what kind of changes that COVID made to your physical access to the tools with which you usually create art, and how that kind of affected your process as creatives?
I can say a little bit about that. Just an irony that I noticed while I was putting together the video, because I don't have any printing materials at my house at all. Usually the printing that I've done has been either in special collections in Norland or at the Book Arts League. And so that's why I ended up creating the video. It was the first video that I ever made. And I noticed while I was putting it together that even though we live in the 21st century, and I should be comfortable with video editing technology, I was far more comfortable with the letterpress printing technology. And I was kind of, even I was having fun and it was a great learning process, but I found myself watching my colleagues doing the thing that I rather would have been doing and missing it. So I was limited. And that forced me to learn new skills, but it also reminded me that I am far more comfortable with the hands-on work than the digital work.
My part of the printing was on my dining room table. So yeah, it would have been easier at the Book Arts League, but my dining room table worked out okay.
I should explain that the Book Arts League is a local nonprofit arts group, actually based in Lafayette, that has a fully equipped letterpress studio, which, by the way, spent years in Norland Library before it was moved there. So some of the stuff was done there, and Susan and Greg and Danny have all gone there. And then, yes, I am the one that actually has large presses in my barn at home. So in some ways, I have a little more time to go in there because I'm not working on other things that keep me away from it. Anyway.
Thank you. Does anybody else want to respond either to the question about, the challenges of trying to make art in these times, or what the reception's been like for your pieces? Or any other questions you might have.
Well, I mean, it has been difficult, I think, for anyone wanting to share things, really missing that in-person sharing. One thing for filmmaking, I have a feature separate of this project that's on festival circuit this fall. And at first I was really excited. There was even like a festival that had emerged in COVID lockdown to serve the needs of filmmakers, and it was great. We had a great Q&A. It was all virtual, people performing spoken word and music inspired by the film, all kinds of stuff. And then after like the second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth, seventh Zoom festival, I'm like, well, wait, which dates are, what's happening now? Wait, and you can start to see certain festivals aren't even taking advantage of the affordances of the online stuff. So we don't do Q&A with artists and that kind of deal. So I'm just kind of venting frustration in a way. And I can't imagine this. I have films, people can still log in and watch them. I can't imagine what it's like if your art depended on physically being there.
Yeah. So Michael, what are musicians doing? I mean, especially, I think the difficulty, especially knowing that COVID is aerosolized, especially for, your particular instrument, right?
Yesterday, the Colorado Symphony had its first full rehearsal of this year, and it was very interesting because I would say normally I'm about 18 feet away from the conductor, and I was about 40 feet away from the conductor. If anyone's ever been to Betcher Concert Hall, they actually have the brass musicians where the chorus usually performs, like way back there, and they've spaced incredibly widely, and and they've limited the number of musicians on stage, and we're working right now on creating content for pay-per-view access over the next few months. So it's very challenging when you have an 80-piece ensemble where 25 of the people are aerosol creators, we will call ourselves, and so but it was exciting to see that they're trying to find ways to safely bring people back into the space and things like that. But it's been very tough on performing arts organizations for sure.
Yeah, by the way, I'm happy to talk offline to anyone who wants to kind of think about ways that the CHA can partner with different arts and music organizations, because we do want to have more of a community outreach and collaboration. And I know that's made challenging, especially during COVID times. And we'd be happy, we do have, I think you're all getting our newsletter because we put you on our newsletter since you received these grants. And there is a new event section on our newsletter, and we're happy to try and promote your work because we really are huge believers in the arts and humanities. So
Thank you. Just, it was really a lovely idea for a grant, and gave me some shape and purpose during a pretty frustrating time, and gave my students a lot of feeling of shape and purpose and being heard, and ultimately becoming artistic collaborators with me. And I just think it was really terrific, and I enjoyed all of your projects so much. I got to go back and look at a few more that I don't think I had the right links for, but my goodness, what a fabulous cornucopia. It makes me miss being up on campus, walking around rubbing shoulders with all these talented, cool people.
Well, so we're close to getting on time, and I don't want to keep people, but I have wondered, since a vaccine, and maybe we should ask Bentley's father, since a vaccine may or may not be on our horizon, right? Certainly not as soon as the current president is suggesting, but possibly, if we're to believe Anthony Fauci and Pfizer, maybe even in the spring. But I am wondering whether we should do a second round of shelter-in-place projects. And if we did that, I think what I'd ask is whether any of you would be interested in judging. So stay tuned. I think when it's possible to actually have a reception, I'd love to invite everyone who's still in Boulder for a live reception where we can shake hands and eat food and meet each other. And, maybe Michael and Matt and others will perform music for us to enjoy. I think that'd be really lovely. So Stay tuned. Please be in touch with us. We'd be happy to support all of your work. And just thank you.
And speaking of supporting your work, if anybody ever creates other work that they'd like us to promote on our social media or anything like that, please reach out to us and I'd be happy to make some social media posts promoting your work as well.
Have a wonderful night, everybody. Thank you.